uh, finishing up some material that we didn't get to talk about on Wednesday related to zooarchaeology and specifically looking at domestication of animals. So where we ended, we were looking at survivorship curves for animal populations at archaeological sites. And what this shows again is here's 100% down to 0, and here are the ages of the animals. So in any of your sets of animals, you're obviously going to have a decrease to 0. Now how steep that is can depend on whether the animals are being used for wool, for milk, or for meat. Right? So for milk, there's a lot of kill-off of young males even before they mature, right? And then a gradual die-off after that. For meat, they wait until the animals are mature, like the sheep or the goat. They kill them off, right? And then you can see a gradual decline after that. They obviously keep some around to keep the population going. And then if they're using them for wool mainly, it's a very gradual decline because they're keeping the animals around as long as they can. So they did a test in Turkey because they wanted to see from the earliest sites in Turkey with domestication, what were the animals being used for? Were they being used mainly for milk, for meat, for wool? Right? So they explored the site in Turkey. They aged the animals looking at the fusion of the bones, right? The eruption of the teeth, the wear patterns on the teeth, and they came up with this profile for this one specific site in Turkey called Gritila, which is right at the beginning of domestication of animals. And if you look at the profile, the survivorship curve, this most closely fits a survivorship curve for meat production. So it looks like the earliest domesticated animals, probably the reason they were domesticated is so that people had an available supply of meat handy. And that makes sense. That's not too surprising. Okay, so those are some of the ways that you can tell that people either were starting to domesticate animals or that they had already domesticated animals or plants. Another way you could tell, at least that they were beginning to domesticate animals, is a shift in the types of animals that you find at the site. Right? So here, for example, this is in the Middle East, and you can see the early period, 8,000 to 7,000 BC. The period right after that, 7,000 to 6,000 BC. Right? What you see is the proportions of the animals have changed. Early on, there's a lot of wild animals like gazelle, these small deer, and fox. And then later on, there's a shift. They're still wild, but they're shifting to the animals that later become domesticated, like lots of sheep and goat, right? More pig, more cattle. Still some of these other wild animals, but they're beginning to shift their focus away from animals that are not good for domestication towards animals that are good for domestication. So finding this in archaeological deposits, this kind of evidence, sort of helps us understand the things that led up to the domestication of animals. Okay, another piece of evidence. If you find animals at an archaeological site and that area is really not suitable for those animals, or that's not the wild habitat for those animals, you might be able to draw the conclusion that people move those animals to that area, and that shows, again, either domestication or the beginnings of domestication. Right? There's also cultural evidence for domestication. That is, can you find evidence that people and animals are living in close proximity to each other with human control over the animals? In Iran, for example, they found a goat hoof print in the mud brick. So when people were making mud bricks at the site, goats were obviously there in the village, and one of them stepped in one of the bricks and it dried with that hoof print in it. You also have, you can see here, a burial with dogs, and that again shows that there's a connection between humans and animals. This is an artistic scene that shows milking. Right? So this is a little bit later. This is after they've already domesticated animals, but this is the kind of evidence that could show you, look, humans are beginning to use animals for specific purposes. This is an example from Mesopotamia, pretty much the same thing, of them milking animals, and then you can see pouring the milk out of the jars there. Another interesting piece of evidence is actually wear and tear on the bones of the animals, right? So here you can see these animal bones. There's a lot of scar tissue up here, and that's from the animals being used as draft animals to pull things like a plow, for example. Right? And so they're being used so heavily by humans. Right? You can see this guy's getting a ride right there, but they're being used so heavily by humans that their bones are not what you would see in the wild. They're actually being worn down, and there's scar tissue on them. So that's another good piece of evidence that you have domestication happening. Okay, so overall, the evidence for domestication, like we talked about, is a decrease in the size of animals, change in the horn shape of goats, culling patterns that show the controlled use of animals for milk, meat, or wool, proportions of animals changing, such as they're beginning to focus on animals that eventually become domesticated, animals appearing outside of their natural habitats, or artistic cultural evidence, right, that depicts animals, and then finally animal bones that show sort of heavy wear and tear, and that they were being used for labor. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in the last part of the class on Wednesday, but obviously we had the lab, we went a little bit over, but please, hopefully you're taking a look at this recording, and there will be a couple of questions on the exam on Monday about the domestication of animals. Okay, thanks.